How in touch are you with your inner animal? Are you aware each day that you are a mammal that has mammalian needs? Whether you are a horse person or not, you are going to love the conversation today with Beth Killough of Circle Up. The Circle Up experience is an equine leadership training program that absolutely blew my mind when I got to participate in it about a year ago. Beth and I became thick as thieves at that point, and now we're even collaborators. And what she and her horses have taught me about my own leadership was transformational, so powerful. You cannot argue with a horse. So I'm really excited for her to be here today to teach us about natural leadership, humans as animals, how we respond to pressure. We're also going to learn about the 4 types of awareness that, whether we are conscious of or not, actually guide us in our daily lives. And when we squash them, we lose a huge part of our power. We're allowed to honor our inner mammal. We're allowed to listen to our instincts. We're allowed to recognize that we are part of a herd that has needs, a herd that is sensitive to its environment. Welcome back to Allowed. Saddle up, giddy up, let's get into the conversation. Allowed. When you were born, you were whole, perfect. Then somewhere along the way, you learned that parts of you were not allowed here, and you began to chip away at yourself. What are the pieces of you that you've put into the basement? The parts of you that we cannot see anymore, or that you cannot even remember? What are the ways that you, without even knowing it, are eroding your own aliveness, your creativity, and your well-being? And how can you reclaim the wholeness that is your birthright? I'm Dr. Caneel Joyce, and I'm here to join you in exploring these questions and many more you didn't even know you were allowed to ask. You are allowed to grow. You're allowed to dream. You are allowed to be exactly who you are and to become the next version of who you want to be. Start your journey of exploration with me right now on Allowed. Allowed. You are allowed to be whole. Your journey is unique only to you. One of the things that you may be discovering is that you actually have quite a bit of wisdom there in your gut instinct. Your body may sometimes send you messages as you become aware of yourself, of others in your environment, of your relationships, and even of the space that you're in itself, the physical space, and all of what it affords you and doesn't afford you. This kind of wisdom we have found here is one of the most powerful ways that we can be connected to our inner leadership, our full power. Now, you showing up here every week is so helpful in giving you a sense of momentum in your own growth and opening up new things that you can be aware of so that you can claim your full power. So I'm really happy that you're back and that you're engaged here today. We have a very special guest, a therapist, an author, a poet, a teacher, a coach, and a master of horses. And her horses actually also act as coaching collaborators for her, and I've had the chance to experience that myself. So let's get straight into the conversation with my friend Beth Killough of the Circle Up experience. Allowed. Beth, it's so great to have you here on the show today.
It's such a pleasure to be with you.
And I just got to see you a couple days ago in the flesh down here in LA, and now we're sitting here in a Zoom call. And where are you calling in from today?
I am calling from Take a Chance Ranch in Morgan Hill, California, which is my home base and is in the Bay Area south of San Jose.
This is really fun to finally be on this podcast together after connecting magically about a year ago through one of my clients.
You and I just clicked.
Yeah. That felt like we'd known each other for years.
Yeah.
Then when I came up to see the ranch and to meet you in person, I got to do some of your very specific and beautiful form of leadership coaching through horses that I had downloads that were like, oh yeah, this is my pattern that I've had for years.
Those patterns emerge quickly. And a lot of times when they emerge with people and we're talking about them, we're a little stuck because we can understand it intellectually and even emotionally, but it's hard to find circumstances to enact something that allows that pattern to change so immediately. But with the horses, there's this space to practice something right
Mm.
there, right then, and to
Mhm.
notice how different everything feels when we do.
So let's talk about this. Maybe we could back up a little bit, and you
Sure.
could just introduce yourself in your own words of, who are you? What are you about? What do you do?
I have been a lifelong horse person and also very involved with dogs. And it's always been a part of my life that's been enriching, a place for learning, a place to learn partnership and relationship. And I have sought out that area of my life since I was about 5 years old.
Mm.
And along the way, I also got a more traditional education. I started my career path getting an MFA in poetry,
Mm.
and I've always been a writer, and I'm still a writer. And I taught creative writing and contemporary American literature for about 8 years. And during that time, I noticed that my students spent a lot of time in office hours talking about their inner lives.
Huh.
And I decided to go take a clinical psychology course, a graduate course, and I knew right away that I my path was taking a turn.
Hmm.
And that same week that I started investigating programs, I found a beautiful piece of writing on equine therapy,
Hmm.
and I thought, yes, helping people and doing it with horses as partners. And it took me another 15 years of letting those paths go side by side before they converged on their own.
Wow.
So, yeah, I had a very traditional therapy practice and beautiful therapy practice and kind of the secret life as a cowgirl.
Hmm.
And they slowly came together, and when I finally started bringing the animals more into my work, it
Hmm.
really changed everything. And I realized I couldn't go back into the office, and that I needed to do this work outside and with animals, and that it needed to be much more organic and spontaneous, and that I needed a different clinical container.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think to your namesake of Aloud,
Hmm.
it really was about allowing these two parts of me
Hmm.
to be fully integrated into a whole.
Hmm.
And so there's like a wholeness that was born when I
Hmm.
allowed those parts to converge.
Oh, so beautiful.
I really take myself through every day and every experience as a human being with an animal body.
What does that mean? Why is that a distinctive insight?
So I had a love of language at an early age. And I also love thinking and problem
Hmm.
solving. And both of those became ways for me to actually numb myself.
Mm.
And so on the one side, there are these like incredible human brain gifts that we have
Hmm.
of playing with words and expressing ourselves with language and doing relationship through language. And this
Hmm.
incredible brain that allows us to think and problem solve and do our connection through thought. But
Hmm.
it always felt like something was missing. It felt
Hmm.
like something was that there was like this deeper layer that we weren't accessing. But when I was with my animals, I very much felt connected to that. And it's a primitive layer that I think humans have we've have been socialized out of us so as to not be barbaric and to not um, to be able to be good villagers with each other. We have learned to put the brakes on certain parts of ourselves in a very good way. But the
Hmm.
cost is that we have numbed a
Hmm.
whole messaging system that is about our instincts, and we're
Hmm.
not very connected to that anymore. And
Hmm.
so when I think about myself in the world or take myself into situations connected to that human animal piece, I'm inviting that awareness into
Hmm.
everything that I do. It doesn't mean that I'm disavowing language or that I'm disrespecting thought or the power of our intellect in any way. It's just I'm
Hmm.
integrating this piece
Hmm.
that has, for a lot of us is has been very quieted. There's certain professions where it's utilized more, first responders,
Hmm.
people in the military, athletes are more in touch with that human animal.
Yeah.
Um, when we become parents, early parenting experiences are very primitive, and we may be more in touch with our survival system. When you've got this like human life in your arms, and you know that the survival is about you, and it's so in the body, it awakens a part of us. For a lot of us, when we are in those situations where we become more connected to the human animal, it feels like a crisis because we're so not used to using it.
Yeah.
And so it's such a wake-up call to those senses that it can be shocking. And I think it's why a lot of new mothers struggle, where they're so unprepared for what that's going to feel like. And we're so out of touch with those parts of ourselves, and we don't know how to lead ourselves or others from that place.
But survival, the existential threats of life, those are also found, big time in the game of entrepreneurship.
Right.
Which you and I both play, and many of our clients play as well. We serve sometimes similar populations.
Right.
And that being faced with survival on a day-to-day basis, survival of our herd of employees, is also feels like a crisis.
That's so true.
Like a crushing responsibility.
Yeah, it's so true, especially because most humans, because we haven't been connected to that animal and that survival piece, we actually don't know how to share leadership. We don't know how. So we've really lived in sort of more of like a lone wolf phenomenon as humans. And so a lot of people that end up in leadership roles, two things happen. One is that the people around them bubble wrap them so that they end up isolated, the leader.
They'll protect them.
Right. Protecting them from mostly the truth.
Yep.
So then on the other side of that same dilemma is that the leader takes on sole responsibility, which is impossible. There's no other mammal group that would do such a thing. So if you watch the herd, for instance, I live here at my ranch, I have a herd, and I watch them in their leadership roles. The leadership cycle through the herd throughout the day, meaning that they're sharing awareness responsibilities. And it's an agreed upon covenant of the group. And it would be comical to watch another mammal in a group take on that responsibility solely. You would watch a horse like running around the pasture all day trying to take care of everyone. It would be like,
right.
That's what it would look like. Yeah.
What a neurotic horse.
Right. And so, but you can understand why somebody who has a lot of visionary talent that tries to then take on that role falls apart, because it's so impossible to be able to do both.
Yeah, we're trying to control things so far out of our control.
Right. And it distracts us from those gifts that are uniquely ours. So we can do it some of the time, and we ought to. It's a shared responsibility, but we certainly can't do it all the time. And some individuals are better at it than others. And I prefer to have the work that I do with people begin with the animals, so that we can begin the work that we're doing on development and relationship and culture with an awareness and a language that is different than what we're used to using, and invites us to expand the scope of what leadership and culture really mean.
Can you give us some examples? What's some of the language?
A lot of times when we talk about mindfulness, for instance, and we are encouraging in the world of leadership, where we're encouraging leaders to be more conscious, more reflective, to have more like a sense of who they are as leaders. When we are talking about it in terms of natural leadership, which is the model that I work in, and I'm asking an individual or a group to consider how they come to the table as mammals. What we're looking at are these 4 layers of awareness.
Beth, do you have a handout or something that you can share with our listeners around 4 layers of awareness?
I do.
Great. We will link to that from the show notes at caneel.com/podcast-11. Then Beth's website is also, it's thecircleupexperience.com, which we'll also connect with.
Wonderful. So the first layer is, as my own mammal system, what's going on inside of me? What's happening in my thinking, my emotions? What am I doing behaviorally? What's what's just this one system, this one organism doing?
Mhm.
And a lot of times when we're talking about mindfulness, that's kind of where the awareness exercise stops.
Mhm.
Or it'll stop right at just at thinking, but not in the
Yeah.
body.
Right.
And so, but in the animal world, and especially in the herd, the next layer of awareness would be looking to others. What's going on with you? And so
Mhm.
that empathy layer of what's
Mhm.
going on with my fellow herd member. Um,
Mhm.
what am I noticing in their behavior? What does it feel like to be near them?
Mhm.
And then the third layer of awareness is now what's going on between us?
Hmm.
And
Mhm.
so what's the we? What's the we
Mhm.
that's happening? And the herd is always connected. There's like this inextricable fabric, and they can pull apart in terms of space
Mhm.
and still have that connection where they're tuning into each other.
Hmm. Mhm.
So their survival system is based on being able to tune in on that layer.
Oh, this is reminding me. I remember sitting in the back seat of my parents' car on a long drive, and now that I have kids, they do this to me too, of just saying, "Are we there yet? When are we gonna be there? How much longer? I want a snack," all those things. And we used to drive out to Idaho every, like, summer. Actually, I don't think I actually did the drive very many times. I think my dad gave up on that, and he did the drive by himself for
Uh-huh.
13 hours, and then we would fly out there and meet him because it was a nightmare. Uh, but I remember seeing his scalp lift like maybe a quarter of an inch up up higher on his head. And that was the signal to me of don't say anything else. Like
Wow.
he's lost his patience. And if I do something else, it's not going to be good. So just I was so attuned to always
Yeah.
like because I think that's one of his particular stress responses. We all do our own thing,
Yeah.
but I remember just seeing it, and only that
That
was
was
like,
the
okay,
signal.
stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that what you're describing, the way that we talk about it, and I really learned this from my like lifelong horsemanship and the language for it around a lot of the language that I use in natural leadership comes from my lifelong studies in animal
Mhm.
behavior and partnering with my dogs and my horses to do different things. And but we're talking about the feel of the relationship. And in that car, you could feel something change.
Mhm.
You could
Mhm.
visually see it as well, and that was the signal. But you could probably feel it in the car
Oh,
as
yeah.
well. There's like a thickening of the air.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was not clear air anymore.
Yes.
It was yeah.
Yeah, and that's what we refer to in natural leadership is there's a feel in the relationship, and we're so used to being in our language and in our thinking that we're not able to connect with that. And so,
Mhm.
but when we start paying attention on this other frequency, you can see and feel those things changing
Mhm.
in a group, whether
Hmm.
it's 1, 2, or 22, you can feel those things shifting and changing.
Mhm.
And a lot of, we'll talk about this in terms of, like in the general public around emotional intelligence, but I don't
Mhm.
think it hits the mark. I think this is relational intelligence.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really, I like that a little better. Um,
Mhm.
and so, but that third layer that you're remembering,
Mhm.
kids are completely connected to their natural leadership. That
Mhm.
animal piece, they haven't lost it. It hasn't been fully socialized out of them.
Mhm.
And so a
Yeah.
lot of our memories of when we were most tuned into that are
Mhm.
from childhood.
Yes. That
Yeah.
makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
What's the
fourth,
fourth
yeah,
layer?
the fourth layer is we forget this one a lot, is what's going on in our surroundings that's
Mhm.
affecting me or the we. Might be
Hmm.
affecting me, you, or the we. And so we're very ego driven. So a lot of if I'm reading myself or you, it's all about what it's all about me. What's
Mhm. Yeah.
going on with me? How did I impact you? But
Yeah.
if you look around and expand your scope, so scope's another concept we do a lot of work in natural leadership,
Mhm.
you'll see that there's something environmental affecting the system.
Hmm.
And so it could be like that tension for your dad, for instance. If you
Mhm.
looked at when that happened and patterned over time, it might be the time of day.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
it wasn't just about you guys or you.
It's also that we're driving through the barren desert in a car,
Right.
like
And it might have been, well, time of day, like maybe it was dark, like it was dusk. And so his
Mhm.
eyesight started getting affected by that. And so
Mhm.
there's more tension in his face, causing his scalp to
True.
change. But we often ascribe the things that we're noticing about what's happening relationally. We forget to expand that out to
Mhm.
take in what's going on environmentally. And those environmental pressures
Mhm.
affect things relationally. And we
Mhm.
sometimes, it's not, sometimes we just need to do the slightest pivot to shape things so that we can release the amount of pressure that's going on. And
Yeah.
so, and it isn't, and that can actually make or break a relational experience.
Oh, completely. I'm
Yeah,
really, really sensitive to sound
me too.
and to voices, and
Mhm,
so if there are multiple people talking at the same time, I
mhm,
I really lose track of both people. Um, and and so, before I really realized this about me and realized that my experience of that was really different from other people's experience, that if my son was crying or talking to me, and then my husband starts talking to me about something that's not my son crying, I would look at him with like these like daggers in my eyes, like, how could you talk to me right now? Which felt like their relationship, but truly it was my stress level was so high from trying to process so much, especially when one of them is your baby crying. It's very
right.
all consuming. But it was just yeah, that the environment for me is the dimension of it that's so heightened is that sound and voices layer.
In the workplace today, and a lot of the work that I focus on now is about, wellness for people and really looking at culture from how we do our relationships and how we
Mm,
take care of ourselves and take care of each other or the environment that we work in. Um, I think about things like open workspaces
mhm.
and
Yeah.
how much pressure that puts on a human animal system to have to
Mhm,
be it's very stimulating to our nervous system to be
mhm,
in that open workspace, and there's
mhm.
not a mammal on the planet that would not have a reaction to that. But
Yeah.
we don't think of ourselves that way, and so we like the idea of it, we like
Mhm,
the aesthetic of it, and
mhm,
then when you put your animal body in it, something happens that it
mhm,
doesn't feel right. And
mhm,
it's actually that piece of what kind of pressure is on the nervous system.
mhm,
And so you'll see more conflict and actually more social isolation in those environments, and it's because
mhm.
you're loading up all those nervous systems.
Oh, wow. So this is, I'm wondering, we are on some level aware of the stress of a situation like an open office,
Mhm.
but I don't think we give ourselves permission for that to matter to us, right? We might not even
Absolutely.
know where the stress is coming from.
Absolutely. We don't give ourselves permission to be nervous systems, first and
Yeah.
foremost, that
Mhm,
have this incredibly sensitive, almost like a soundboard that
mm,
that a sound technician would use with all of these different dials, and that
mm,
it's an incredibly sensitive system
mm,
that we're not connected to until it's flooded.
mhm.
And
Wow.
so and we flooded it so much that it's numb.
Mm, mhm.
And so what happens is we only really talk about those pressures at the point of overwhelm.
And we get reactive and we get triggered
Right. Right.
and
And
and then our brain goes offline often.
I know, and I think, when I first learned about emotional reactivity in the brain was probably in 2002. I was studying to be a therapist, and I got to go do a few-day workshop with Dan Siegel.
Mhm,
And it was like earlier in the integration of neuroscience and psychotherapy, and really looking at interpersonal neuroscience
mhm,
and starting to think about our nervous systems. And that I really started connecting with this human animal piece at that point, because
mm,
I'd been sitting on horses for 30 years at that point and knowing
mm,
what it was like to be a synced up nervous system with another mammal.
uh,
And for a long time, and still I think today, around reactivity, it has like a bad rap. Like, you
mhm,
should not be a reactive person. But our
mhm,
reactivity, the problem is that we're so disconnected from all the signs of reactivity
Mhm.
that we're getting the signals of it coming down the pike, like you
Mhm.
described with your crying baby and your
Mhm.
husband. We're so disconnected with all those signs and signals that
Mhm.
the reactivity happens, way down the road from where it
Mhm.
began.
Yeah. Yeah. So we and this connects to boundaries too, right? We let the boundaries
Absolutely.
get crossed and we keep thinking like it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. We should on ourselves like I need to be able to handle this. It should be okay with me, but it's not.
That's right.
And
That's
actually this
right.
was one of the first conversations that you and I had where
Yeah.
you spontaneously offered me some powerful coaching that really like profoundly, supported me, helped me. But it was just, if this relationship is going this way, of course it's not working for you.
Mhm.
It's not respecting you as an animal.
That's right.
Man, it's like, "What?
Yeah.
I
And
get
we
to
can
do that."
feel when something's like all if and again, we have to slow down and give our like start to tune into on that nervous system
Mhm,
layer, and it is in the body, and give ourselves permission that we are having a reaction. And
mhm,
actually, most of them make good sense.
mhm,
And
mhm,
when we blow up and detonate, those don't. But it's
mhm,
because they do. Everything makes good sense, but those
mhm.
happen because of 35 offenses to our nervous system.
Yeah, that we weren't
All those
naming.
boundaries crossed that we allowed. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
How does this relate to leadership? So if I'm a leader
Mhm,
and I'm leading a team, how does understanding this model with 4 layers of leadership, how does 4 layers of awareness,
mhm,
how does that help me? What how do I put that to actual
mhm,
use?
mhm. Well, let's say you think about how you run your meetings.
Mhm,
Most people hate meetings.
mhm.
Period.
Yep.
Let's just stop there. Goodbye. Um, no, I mean, the reason people hate meetings is because they're not getting their needs met in those meetings. And most of the time, what people are actually needing is connection. And
Mhm,
they're doing a lot of information sharing, or they're having to do a lot of being talked at.
mhm,
And they're having to do a lot of lying. They have to sit
mhm.
there and not do anything about any of that.
Yeah.
They have to sit there and allow it and not change it. And
Mhm,
so Cesar Millan says that humans are the only mammals that follow unstable leadership. And so we're the mammal that will sit in that room and not do anything about it, and then do it the next week and the
ah,
next week and the next week. And
yeah.
so if I'm a leader and I'm thinking about natural leadership awareness and how I might want to bring those into my world, I would start with what I notice in my meetings. Like,
Hmm,
where do I see people seeking connection? Where do I see people trying to move away from pressure that's in the room? Are people desiring to be part of the conversation? Like, where I would be taking this concept of scope and trying to
mhm,
lean back a little bit so that I
hmm,
can see what's really going on in the system in that room and
mhm,
where things might be out of balance. And
hmm,
and I would start with my own instrument of me.
mhm,
I
mhm,
I actually can tune in here and
mhm.
feel all of that.
Yeah.
And so as a leader, what do I want out of the meeting? How am I going into the meeting? Do I have enough calmness and presence that I can actually feel what's happening in those relationships? So I'm
Mhm,
listening to the content and I'm feeling the process of it all.
mhm,
And then I'm just going to observe it. And then I can walk away and really think through, like, what information did I get? And where do I want to adjust things just a little bit and start to play with it to see where am I going to get the most out of that time together? How am I going to get
mhm,
the best out of people in that
mhm,
experience? And what's really at the end of the day, what really is at the heart of what we're needing when we all come together?
mhm,
What's really the utmost significance of that gathering?
yeah. Can you talk more about pressure? What do you mean when you say pressure?
So, when you ask that question,
Mhm,
you you bring a piece of pressure into the relational
mhm,
system between the two of
mhm,
us.
mhm,
And if I had like barking dogs outside and like an itchy leg and my phone was ringing and
Mhm.
a deadline and we had run out of time, those would be all pressures as well. And
Okay.
how would it impact my ability to take that question in and
Mhm.
synthesize it and be able
Mhm.
to actually think and
Mhm.
feel it and connect with you?
Got it.
And so these are all pressure is an inevitable part of life. It's part
Mhm.
of the physical universe. It's
Mhm.
an inevitable part of relationship. And it's
Mhm.
actually how we influence each other. So our power begins with being able to bring in elements of pressure into our relationships, and it's what moves us.
Mhm.
But if we're not tuned in to what pressure is and our sensitivity to it, whether
Mhm.
some of us are more sensitive, like that, those of us that have dog ears, for instance, are
Mhm.
sensitive to auditory pressure.
Mhm.
Some people are less sensitive to pressure. But when we're not paying attention to that layer in our relationships, either with
Mhm.
ourselves or each other,
Mhm.
we're flooding ourselves or each other more often than we realize.
Mm.
And so a lot of the time, if you think about the points of the day where you get flustered,
Mhm.
overwhelmed, exhausted, lost, like you don't know what was happening and you like, where
Mhm.
was I? Like that kind of,
Mhm.
those are all signs and symptoms that you're not tuning in to pressure and adjusting to it.
Mm.
So
Ah.
it isn't so much that we're trying to eliminate it. We're
Mhm.
actually trying to tune in so we can adjust
Mhm.
ourselves to it.
Mhm. And use it, thoughtfully, right? Like,
Exactly. Yes.
why have why have a bunch of employees feeling pressure for a lot of reasons that have nothing to do with what's really, really important?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
if we're not tuning in to, again, back to the herd and kind of those lessons from the horse herd, if one individual in the herd is experiencing, let's say, an environmental pressure, they're
Mhm.
going to signal that, and the whole herd is going to take a look at that and look if there's something to respond to. If
Mm.
there's not, they're going to signal to each other that they can go back to a homeostasis
Mhm.
and back to calm alert. And that
Mhm.
calm alert state gives us the best chances for survival as any
Mhm.
mammals. So
Mhm.
conservation of energy, attunement to each other, and moving forward at a sustainable pace.
Mhm.
And when we're not tuning in, listening to and adjusting to pressure, we oftentimes get caught by surprise. And that's where like all of a sudden the environment has like sucked us up, or we've
Mhm.
gotten kind of swallowed up by it.
Mhm.
Um, because we're surprised by the pressure.
Mhm.
We're
Mhm.
so tuned out until it's too much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. We're narrow it our focus gets really narrow.
it does.
And I think each, there that's often based on our personality is what are we gonna narrow in our focus on, like, habitually speaking.
Yes,
For some of us, it's we're gonna only be attending to the relationship.
right.
For others, we're really only attending to, like, myself,
Mhm,
my personal safety,
mhm.
my physical needs. And then maybe are some of us also much more focused on just the environment, and we're not really attending to the relational elements.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And so I'd love you to share with our listeners about the way that you actually teach this that
Mm,
is so powerful, because this is where
mhm,
the horses come in.
mhm,
Now we understand a lot of the things that we can learn about us as human
mhm.
animals looking at a herd of horses, but the way that you do this is it's surprising. So it has nothing to do with getting on the back of a horse.
It doesn't. Everything we do is on the ground. Um, Although I've been recently exploring a little bit, doing a little bit of on horseback as well, because there's
Oh,
some
cool.
amazing stuff that can happen there. But yeah, everything we do is on the ground, and the beautiful thing about the horses as teachers is that because they're prey animals, and their sensitivity to things like pressure in their environment is so beautifully um, and it's so beautifully hardwired and hasn't been that hardwiring hasn't been touched. It
Mm,
hasn't. It's still they're connected to that survival piece and will respond in order to take care of themselves no matter
mhm,
what. And and they will give feedback to us about what they're noticing in their environment, in themselves and with us. And the feedback is honest and direct. And the nice thing about working with them as prey animals is that because flight is their best defense, moving away from pressure versus going into fight is the safest option for them. So you could do this work with dogs, and I've been working with dogs my whole life, and they're just as important teachers to me. But as far as working with clients, horses are
Not as
actually
safe
safer.
having a Doberman running
Yeah,
at you, like,
yeah,
trying to
yeah, they're safer
attack
than
the pressure.
yeah. So, I think there's basically anything that we decide that we want to do with a horse, if we start taking a step into relationship with them and bring all of our expectations and ideas and relational gestures and relational invitations to the table, they immediately start to respond by trying to figure out what kind of relationship are we going to have. And by beginning a nonverbal conversation with the human about how to have some partnership. And in any horse herd, they have to have, again, that shared leadership. So somebody has to be in awareness commitment at all times.
What
And
is awareness commitment?
it means that that whoever is sort of on duty at the time is taking in those 4 layers of awareness that we talked about and is taking responsibility for alerting the herd of changes.
Okay, so this is a role that someone you could be committed to, but you're not, maybe not always.
Impossible to be always.
Okay,
So
yes, texting.
as a human, if you feel that that's your role in your household or your team, in your workplace, in a group, and that you're the one, there's probably something wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You
Okay, so
might be the best at it. It might be a natural gift of yours, but you should never be the one. And in the horse herd, they share that.
yeah.
When we show up with them in relationship and we're stuck in our head and thinking about ourselves, or we're obsessing about them, what does the horse think of me? Do they like me? I really want them to like me. We're signaling to them that we're not available to be an awareness partner
Hmm.
because
So they're not safe to follow.
we're not safe to follow, and not follow in terms of tell me what to do, but in terms of can I relax while you're aware and partner with whatever it is you're doing so that my nervous system can have a little bit of a break.
Yeah, wow.
So when we're stuck in one layer of awareness, which we often are as humans, we're often signaling to them that we're impaired. And so they will start to give us feedback trying to figure out, well, what's possible in this relationship. And so as that emerges, and regardless of what activity we've decided to do, it starts to open up a channel for asking the human what's going on with them.
The horse is asking the human.
And that gives me, as a coach, an opportunity to ask the human, usually with a place that the human initially gets stuck is the place where they always get stuck.
Yeah. So
That's
give us some concrete examples of what this can look like.
Well, I love what happened when we were working together last week. And this was a great
Yes.
connection back to the topic of pressure.
Yes.
So,
And just for background, so Beth
yeah.
came down last week to work with the folks in my year-long leadership development program, my leadership forum. And this was the final event in a series of year-long, monthly gatherings. So at this point, everybody there knows each other really, really well. They know each other's strengths, weaknesses, where they get hung up, their kind of their personality quirks, uh, where they have, the patterns that they really continue to keep working on, but that are going to keep probably showing up for them for a very long time. And they also really trust each other a lot. But Beth knows none of it. Beth knows none of this content whatsoever. So we're observing, we're sitting in this ranch up in the Palos Verdes Peninsula area, and we're just observing her work with each of the members of the group. Continue.
Okay. So, very early on in the day, they were in 2 different groups selecting horses to work with, and,
Mhm.
2 of the women, picked their horse, and they were gonna the goal was to pick the horse and halter the horse and bring the horse to an area to groom, and these are not horse people, so they're having to
Mhm.
really experiment with how do we choose? How do we approach? How do we do this haltering and leading a horse? So there's a lot of tactical pieces. And then
Mhm.
there's a lot of relational pieces, both for the people that are having to work together and also human to horse.
Mhm.
So the moment that that's probably the best example of what this work can look like happened after this group had gotten their horse to the area where they were going to groom, and it was kind of a tight area, and they
Yeah.
had walked the horse into this tight area, 2 of
A little
them,
kind of like a stable kind of
like a
shape.
stall.
Stall,
Yeah,
yeah.
and, but very tight. It's called, like a, cross ties or a wash rack, but it's like a
Mhm.
narrow little area where you would walk the horse in, and you can turn them around and then tie them to wash
Mhm.
them or groom them. So they
Mhm.
had walked the horse in, both of them together, and then they'd gotten themselves into the corner, and they were
Mhm.
stuck there, and that's when Caneel and I found them. Right. We
Behind the horse, it's a 1,500
Yeah,
pound horse and
that
a
they
wall.
don't know.
Mhm. Mhm.
Between the wall and the horse,
Mhm.
and, they were trying to figure out like, what to do, and the horse had kind of moved on and was, like, looking for something it was to graze on,
Mhm.
and so I asked them, like, "What's going on here?" And I also saw there was, potential safety issue. I had
Mhm.
already assessed it was a very calm horse. It was really sweet. It was completely focused on other things. But
Mhm.
there they were. They're in this tight spot. There's literally no way for them to turn around in the situation they've gotten
And
themselves
they didn't seem scared or concerned about this, like, in any
at
way.
all.
They were busy
Completely
just, like,
unaware.
talking to the horse and
Talking to each other.
praising it, and yeah.
Yeah. And so what I do is I step back as an animal and I see the pressure in that situation, which is the wall, the narrow walls on either side, this big horse, these 2 people, nowhere to turn
Mhm.
around, and the
Mhm.
fact that they're not aware, which is its own pressure. So when you're
Mhm.
dealing with people and they're in autopilot, it
Mhm.
creates its own pressure in the system. And so
Mhm.
I jumped in and said, "So let's step back. I'm going to hold the horse, and I want you guys to step back and take a look at where you were."
Mhm.
And they realized that they had walked themselves into a corner,
Mhm.
and they didn't know it. And so
Mhm.
we got to ask, "So you walk yourself into a corner, and there's an incredible amount of pressure. Like, do you want to go back in there?"
Mhm.
No, I do not wanna
Mhm.
go back in there. Now that I'm out of there, I can see that that was way too much pressure,
Mhm.
and there's
Mhm.
nowhere to turn around.
I remember distinctly both of them saying, "But when I was in there, I didn't feel any pressure at all. I didn't feel uncomfortable at all." And I said, "Did it feel kind of familiar?"
Yes,
Like, and because these are 2 extremely high performing individuals, like big time leaders, superstars, who tend to put a lot of pressure on themselves. It
right?
was very familiar. It was like home.
It was like home, and high performance is not the problem.
Mhm.
High performance is such a human gift. It is such a beautiful gift. That is
Mhm.
not the problem. The problem is, what an autopilot person does with pressure to high performance potential. And
Hmm.
so it actually chisels away at the high performance
Mhm.
potential.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so it comes with a huge cost to not be aware of that, to because they're signing up for things and taking on things that probably could if they could begin saying no to those and attending
Yeah.
to that pressure, it would probably skyrocket that high performance into a whole different dimension.
Yeah.
And
Which
so
actually, interestingly, was the path of both of those women over this year,
oh, beautiful.
which just proves, I mean, that was completely the theme. So it was just so, and that actually happened with every single client that you worked with on that day, was that what showed up there in the ring, this was like, oh, so familiar. Like it was just such um a concrete expression, like a manifestation of the very leadership patterns that they've been working on.
Right.
And which is why I love your work so much. I mean, just to have it be, we can often think to ourselves, oh, this thing I was talking about with my coach or my therapist, that's important, but that may not be really my main thing. Maybe it's something else, or maybe that growth wasn't real.
Right.
But then we get in with the horse and we see it's unarguable.
It is.
The horse is responding to me this way.
One of the beautiful things, like what you said around like highlighting, underlining, validating, and etching into our consciousness, this is a theme for me, is
Mhm.
one thing that happens. And it happens also in the body. And so
Mm.
when they were able, I asked them to go back into that space so they
Mm.
could feel how much pressure was actually there,
Mhm.
because we need to feel it in our body so that we can use that part of us in the future. And
Mhm.
then what we did was an exercise where they could go in there and slower and noticing how far into the corner could
Mm.
they go before there was too much pressure. So that they
Mhm.
could, if you can slow it down and start to feel that instrument of the body as a
Mhm.
sensor of
Mhm.
pressure, you can use that going forward, knowing
Mhm.
that you're used to loading yourself up and that you
Mhm.
can be a little numb to that. How can we
Mhm.
slow that down and adjust more frequently and more consistently? Because there
Mhm.
is where we can make those changes. And that's like one exercise that we'll do is like an overall pressure audit with,
Mm.
and start to, like notice during certain times of the day. Morning is a really high pressure time for a lot of people, especially when they have kids and jobs. And like,
Mhm.
how can you do a pressure audit around how you start your day and how that
Mm.
impacts the rest of your day as an animal in the world, an animal
Ah,
leader?
so what are all the sources of pressure in my space, in my system, my human system?
Exactly, and then how can I slow that down or
Mhm.
start to actually eliminate some of them, because some of them don't need to be there. I'm loading
Yeah.
up in ways that I don't need to be. So how can I probably shouldn't be listening to the news because it's
Mhm.
too much.
Mhm.
And I can't make lunches in the morning. I need to stop
Mhm.
doing that. And I
Mhm.
should not be checking email until my kids are already out of they're not in the general
Mhm.
vicinity. It's too much.
Mhm.
So we can start to look at where we're loading ourselves up. So when we
Mm.
had them go in just one by one and going into that small space and noticing where it actually felt like too much pressure, they could
Mhm.
start to and then step back and see where
Mhm.
could you tolerate it, but where was it
Mhm.
too much? And then
Yeah.
you start to get a sense of that instrument that is your natural leader.
Finding that little moment of choice where if you
Yeah,
cross, keep going and then getting more tuned,
that's right.
allowing yourself to notice.
That's right.
Which actually, when you have too much pressure, it is hard to notice.
If
When
you're
you're in a high
flooded, you will not
situation.
notice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you'll notice that you're flooded, but you won't notice all of the micro moments and
Mhm.
all of these smaller elements of pressure. And
Mhm.
that's actually what needs to be studied in our lives, is those.
Mhm. I can imagine a lot of our listeners are eager to begin doing their own pressure audits in different areas of their life. Is this something that you have an exercise for, a worksheet of some kind, or you can guide us through?
Sure. I'd love to give you a handout and a worksheet.
Wonderful. So we'll link to that in the show notes at caneel.com/podcast-11. All right. In the ring work.
Ring work.
That's an experience where you actually get to see if and how the horse will follow you.
Yeah, so we'll use a round pen because the horse is loose and there's enough space. Typically, there's enough space where you and the horse can move out of each other's space to get relief from pressure and move back into it, depending on
Mhm.
what feels right at any given moment. And a
Mhm.
lot of times I'll give people about like 5 minutes of without any coaching to just have an introduction, like a greeting with the horse, and to just get used to the space and notice what kind of relationship you can start to get going with the horse. And I'll
Mm.
show them how you can actually create some space or movement from the horse if that's what you want,
Mhm.
or so that you can have a boundary if you want or need it. And then also how you can invite the horse to come be closer to you if that's what you're
Mhm.
wanting.
Mhm.
And so most people have a very challenging time with there being so little direction in that
Mhm.
exercise because we're not used to doing relationship, especially a new relationship, without the social go tos of small talk,
Mhm.
which is
Mhm.
how we relieve our anxiety.
Mm,
And instead, what people are faced with is the intimacy of just starting to see each other. And
mhm.
that's typically what comes up in those first 5 minutes of open relationship time with a human and a horse in the round pen.
Wow. What's intimacy feel like for me?
Yeah, what is
Yeah.
intimacy? What does it
Mm,
feel like to be seen? What does
mhm,
it feel like to want?
mhm,
What does it feel like to be confused or lost and to not know what I want?
mhm,
And, those core themes of the human experience, typically, we're not we get glimpses of them or we get them when we're in crisis, but it's unusual to just have a brand new relationship bring them
mhm,
up.
mhm, mhm.
And sometimes it's just, and often, and I think this is, like, why I one of the things I love most about this work is, a longing for the joy of simple connection.
Ah, yes.
I'm remembering there was someone in our group last week who really, at the end of the day, it was like, well, maybe this horse can follow me and we can go faster. And what if I could do this? And it was all out in the future and big ideas. And at the end
Mhm.
of the day, what he wanted was a hug.
A hug. Yeah.
And what it took for him to give himself permission
Mhm,
that that was enough, and then to
mhm.
slow down and let go of those expectations enough for that horse to accept that hug.
Let him hug him.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was just a beautiful moment.
exquisite moment.
And so much that's what we're wanting. That's why we're in organizations. That's why we're in a team. We really do want to connect.
And that's why the problem with the meetings, there's
Mhm.
no fellowship, there's no kinship, that's not what
Mhm.
they're and that's why we're having them, and we're
That's why, we always advocate beginning every meeting, like, checking in as a human.
yes,
What's your experience in your body right now? What's your
yes,
experience emotionally? How are you coming into this meeting? Where are you coming from?
yeah,
Which is a bit of extension on your other practice of, what did you call it?
settling in.
Settling in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, people come here, for group work, and they're like the pace that they arrive tells me a lot about the system that they live and work in, and
Mhm.
it's like, "Arrive and let's do small talk and get my name tag and teach me
Mhm.
things about how to be leaderly."
Mhm.
And, um and so one of the first things that we do is, take your human animal body for a walk.
Mhm.
And, usually like a good 15 minutes of wandering and noticing and letting yourself be curious and put your body where it wants to be. If it wants to lay on the ground, do it. If it wants to sit under a tree, that's the thing to do. If you
Mhm.
just want to keep wandering and looking and exploring, but letting ourselves settle into a space.
Mhm.
And if we're in a group, settling into a connection in that group, like, we actually need to transition and
Mhm.
let that part of us get oriented and reestablish safety and
Mhm.
comfort and settle from whatever the travel was that it took to get from point A to point B and
Yeah.
release ourselves from some of the, like, residue of whatever we just did
Mhm.
before
Mhm.
we're ready to really relate.
Right.
We don't have practices like that that are part of our normal social structure, so it's
Yeah.
different to ask it of people.
We often, Christmas just happened, right? And we walk in, to a Christmas party. It's like a
Mhm.
company Christmas party. Literally not a single person at the whole entire company Christmas party has ever been in that space before.
Right.
And from the moment you walk in,
Yeah,
you're on,
yeah.
and you're interacting with a bunch of people, like, simultaneously with a bunch of people, eating a bunch of foods that you don't know where they came from or what they are, and I'm realizing how much pressure that is.
Mhm. Huge amount of pressure. I really learned that from my daughter when she was little, and she's just been such a beautiful voice box for the human animal.
Mhm.
And I remember walking into a baby shower at a country club, and there were all these high top tables, and she was like 3 years old, and she just stopped in her tracks. And
Mm.
so I kneeled down and I looked up, and from her vantage point, what the
Uh,
room looked like,
mm,
and I was like, and then I stood back up and just thought about, well, where is it? Like, what's my vantage point right now? Like, I gotta stand here a minute too. Like, good idea.
mm. Mhm.
Yes,
Mhm.
good idea. Where am I? What's going on here? Like, where do I want to put myself? What's the best
Mhm.
pace to enter this? What do I need
Mhm.
to do first that allows me to breathe?
Wow. I know that, for my clients when you were here, was such a powerful, and also it's such a simple and powerful experience. And you have certainly touched my life in a
Aw,
similar way. I'm
thank
really
you.
excited to have more opportunities to work with you. And I know that our listeners will be really hungry to get to have some other way to connect with you. And perhaps
Sure.
if they want to take this work on, is there some way that they can do that that's accessible?
Yeah, so I've tried to create as many entry points into the world of natural leadership as possible. And I'm still in that process, but I understand that people can't always jump right into the horse work. And the horse work is a beautiful starting point because it's such an instant immersion and you really allows a whole lot to wake up within us.
Mhm.
Um, but I've started creating a lot of content that's accessible online and some coaching
Mm,
groups that allow us to start to learn some of these concepts. And all of the programs that I create have experiential elements and experiments that people can go
mm,
do, and then we can come back together as a group to talk about. And so
mm,
while we don't have the horses with us, one of the things that I really that's kind of a passionate message, I suppose, is that the horses wake this up in us, but we already have it.
mm,
And so we wanna they're a fast track. That work
mhm,
is a fast track to that natural leadership. But
mhm,
actually, if we stay committed in our human relationships to tuning in on that layer, we actually can give that to each other. And
mm,
so if I'm doing a mini course, I'm gonna be launching a couple of mini courses around natural leadership awareness. And then one is the power of desire as the
mm.
natural element.
Those are two of my favorite words, power and desire.
I love it. Well, they go hand in hand, and
Yes, they do.
yeah, and so those mini courses, you can start to get into the world of natural leadership through that online content and audio recordings and then group coaching and those experiments, and it at least is a way into this work and to
Great.
yeah, to get started. And then I have a training cohort that I'm running right now, and that's a group of people who are, again, it's anyone who is relating with other humans
Mhm,
can bring this natural leadership approach to what you're doing. So whether you're a coach or a therapist, a teacher, whether you're leading a team or perhaps you're leading a family, those
mhm,
are all opportunities to practice these elements and
mm.
how you lead yourself and how you show up in your relationships. So that's a 9-month program that I've been running, and I'm going to start another cohort. And that's a combination of online material, a lot of content, um, group coaching and group classes that are live. And then we do 3 in-person on-sites at the ranch with that are using nature and animals, using the
Oh,
horses as
wow.
our teachers. Yeah.
So where can they find more information? We'll link to this in the show notes as well, but you have a URL you can share?
At thecircleupexperience.com. That's the best
Great.
place to find me.
Thecircleupexperience.com.
Yes.
Well, Beth, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
To our listeners, thank you so much for being here today and joining us for this fascinating conversation with Beth. And thank yourself for taking the time to learn and to reflect and to grow. And I really hope that these are some practices that you can bring back into your life, settling in and 4 layers of awareness and really reconnecting with the animal that is you. Thanks for being here. And all of the resources that Beth mentioned will be available, and we'll link to them in the show notes at caneel.com/podcast. And we'll see you next week. Aloud. For more information, check out my website, caneel.com/podcast. CANEEL. Caneel.com/podcast, where you can find tons of resources, new episodes, show notes, transcripts, videos, all that good stuff to deepen your learning experience. Also, follow me on social. Send me your feedback there. Ask me your questions. I'm Caneel.is on Instagram and at Caneel on Twitter. Allowed. You are allowed to be whole.